So we made the decision that we're going to take 4 games to the other consoles, just 4 games, not a change to our kind of fundamental exclusive strategy.
I have a bad feeling about this.
I don't sense anything.
Can we say if either of those titles are Starfield or Indiana Jones?
They are not Starfield or Indiana Jones.
You're a liar!
Oh no, Xbox is doomed. No more exclusives. Multi-platform releases will be the death of Xbox. That is not entirely true. Xbox was doomed the moment it bought up ZeniMax Media and Activision Blizzard. First things first, let's not trivialise matters. Xbox has been lagging behind PlayStation and Nintendo for several years now, and it's not likely that will change anytime soon. The disastrous launch of the Xbox One certainly played a major role in that, what with the controversial DRM features and prioritisation being shifted away from video games. Even as someone who has an Xbox One S, I have to admit Microsoft really screwed up back in 2013. And the response from Sony and PlayStation was nothing short of gloriously vindictive.
Thanks.
But despite all of this, 2013 for me was just a taster of what was to come for Xbox and its approach to the video game business. It's really in 2017 where the seeds of Xbox's downfall were planted. You see, in 2017, Microsoft Studios wholly owned 5 development companies: 343 Industries, The Coalition, Mojang, Rare, and Turn 10 Studios. Microsoft had closed 2 studios the previous year, that being Lionhead Studios and Press Play, and was shifting away from Kinect, a new initiative which tried to introduce motion sensor input devices to Xbox consoles that ultimately failed to gain much traction by the time the Xbox One came around. Out of the 5 studios they still owned, only one, that being Mojang, was releasing multi-platform games. Minecraft had always been multi-platform even before Mojang was bought by Microsoft in 2014, and to reverse this decision would have been controversial to say the least. But the remaining 4 were making Xbox exclusive games. Sony, meanwhile, wholly owned 15 game development studios, of which none of them were releasing games for Xbox, but only PlayStation. So you can imagine that over at Team Xbox there was a bit of a problem brewing. How can we continue to compete against PlayStation when we don't have as many studios working on games? Now, of course there were a handful of games Microsoft Studios was publishing, made by third parties such as Dead Rising 3 and 4 from Capcom and Quantum Break by Remedy Entertainment, the latter of which was an Xbox exclusive. If you take a look at all of the games Microsoft was publishing between 2013 and 2018, only a handful were available on PlayStation. The majority were exclusive to Xbox. But it's 2018 where the problems really start for Microsoft and Xbox as a division. Phil Spencer, the man in charge of Microsoft's entire gaming division as executive vice president, was looking to find some more studios to get access to a wider library of games. Xbox Game Pass was already a thing, having launched the previous year with over 100 games at launch. Additionally, Microsoft had been running its own independent developer program where smaller independent development studios could partner with Microsoft to release their games as Xbox exclusives. However, Spencer and many members of the Xbox senior leadership team were thinking about expanding their portfolio. As Sarah Bond put it in the 2021 documentary Power On,
the studios we had were creating amazing games, but we wanted to have more. And the challenges that we went through with Lionhead taught us what to do this time.
Keep that last part in mind, dear viewers, because what happened to Lionhead Studios will come in handy later on. At E3 2018, Phil Spencer comes out and announces the acquisition of 4 game development studios and the establishment of a 5th. This is where I think the problems really started for Xbox. 2 of the studios they bought were Playground Games and Undead Labs, both of which had developed Xbox exclusive games for Microsoft Studios, which isn't a problem in my book. Had Microsoft continued this approach and bought studios they had previously been working with for several years prior, they might not be in the situation they're in now. But the 2 other studios they acquired, Ninja Theory and Compulsion Games, had developed games for multi-platform releases. In Ninja Theory's case, they had made 2 PlayStation exclusive games and only 1 that was an Xbox exclusive. But at the time, many people were excited about these announcements, and I think the reception here must have convinced Phil and the Xbox team, right, everyone is on board with this, let's carry on. This is the path we're going down. Later that year, Microsoft bought two more studios, inXile Entertainment and Obsidian Entertainment. Again, neither of these companies were known for releasing games that were exclusive to Xbox. Obsidian had been working on a game called Stormlands as a launch title for the Xbox One, but that was cancelled in 2013. Nevertheless, this was a big move for Microsoft. More studios meant more games, and more games meant there was potential for more growth. By mid-2019, Microsoft Studios had been rebranded to Xbox Game Studios. The total number of studios they now owned had risen to 15, following the acquisition of Double Fine Productions and the establishment of World's Edge, an Age of Empires studio. But what was Xbox going to do now that they owned a number of studios which had plans for multi-platform releases? Well, in August 2019, Xbox Game Studios president Matt Booty said this.
The question is less binary, about should it be on Switch, should it be on PlayStation, and more, does it make sense for the franchise? In other words, is it a kind of game where it would benefit from the network effect of being on a bunch of different platforms? Or is it a game where we can best support it by putting resources and making sure that our platforms, things like xCloud and Game Pass, are really leaning in to support the game?
Now, this approach is one that I think isn't inherently flawed as a concept. Xbox wasn't ruling out the potential for multi-platform releases, but would consider if it would make sense based on the IP in question. Certainly, if Minecraft had been made an Xbox exclusive, that wouldn't have been received rather well by the community, and Microsoft deciding to allow the franchise to remain multi-platform, as they did with the release of Minecraft Dungeons & Legends, was probably for the better. However, 1 week later, Xbox released this statement after news broke that Ori and the Blind Forest, a game Microsoft Studios had published in 2015, would be releasing on Nintendo Switch via another publisher.
The past year has been an exciting time for us, as we have more than doubled the internal creative teams making up Xbox Game Studios. As these new studios transitioned in, we were aware of some existing commitments to other platforms, and will honor them. However, going forward, these new studios will focus on making games for our platforms. We have no plans to further expand our exclusive first-party games to other platforms.
The overall impression here was that Xbox was planning to stick with the path of exclusives, and had they continued to do so in 2025, it's likely that Xbox could have closed the gap between itself and PlayStation. Yes, if a few releases such as The Outer Worlds or Wasteland 3 or Psychonauts 2 did release on PS4 or Nintendo Switch, that wouldn't be the end of it all, especially if said developer had already planned for multi-platform releases prior to it becoming part of Xbox. And by late 2019, with no more plans for acquisitions anytime soon, the 15 studios under Xbox Game Studios, compared to the 16 now under PlayStation Studios, who had acquired Insomniac Games in November of that year, it seemed like Microsoft and Sony would be continuing to battle it out as the 9th generation of consoles approached. Both had an equal number of development studios, both had incredibly popular IPs exclusive to their side. What else could happen now?
We're really delighted to reach this agreement with ZeniMax and bring Bethesda into the Microsoft family.
Yes, contrary to the statement Microsoft and Xbox put out a year later, in September 2020, news broke that Microsoft would be buying ZeniMax Media, the holding company that owned Bethesda Softworks and a handful of other studios, for $7.5 billion. Clearly, Microsoft wasn't content with having just 15 studios and wanted more. With this acquisition, they would now get their hands on some of the most popular game series of all time, such as Fallout, Doom, The Elder Scrolls, and more. One small issue. None of these franchises were Xbox exclusive. Now, the reasons for Microsoft buying ZeniMax Media are a little convoluted, but let me explain. Microsoft originally claimed that the reason for buying the holding company was so they could expand the Xbox Game Pass service with a wider catalogue of games from Bethesda. However, a few years later, Phil Spencer admitted that the reason was partly due to Sony attempting to convince Bethesda to make Starfield, the first new intellectual property from Bethesda's in-house studio, PlayStation exclusive. Considering that two other Bethesda-published games, Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo, had already been confirmed as PlayStation exclusives, even though this was only for 1 year, I think it's fair to assume that Phil and the Xbox team were concerned that future Bethesda games could be exclusive to PlayStation, prompting their decision to buy ZeniMax. However, I find this argument a little odd and mostly unconvincing. All three of these games were new IPs, and at the time, nobody knew whether they were going to be a success or not. Had they been new mainline entries in the Fallout or Elder Scrolls series, then these concerns may have been more valid and understandable in the eyes of gamers. But alas, no. By March 2021, ZeniMax was now under Xbox, and it was confirmed that some future Bethesda games would be exclusive. With 23 studios now under Xbox Game Studios, it was clear that Microsoft wanted to expand their foothold in the video game market by any means necessary. However, the acquisition itself brought with it more problems concerning game exclusivity. Would Bethesda fans be happy if the next Elder Scrolls or Fallout did not come to PlayStation? What about smaller franchises like Wolfenstein, Doom, or Quake? The Bethesda acquisition, in my opinion, is where the issue of multi-platform releases really started to influence corporate decisions and eventually proved to be a very controversial and divisive topic for Xbox. Starfield was now an Xbox exclusive. Redfall from Arcane Studios Austin will no longer come out on PS5. The same went for Indiana Jones and the Great Circle from Machine Games. But would these decisions pay off? Spoiler alert for the former two releases, no. PlayStation players were probably happy that they too did not have the option to spend $70 on a game that was neither interesting nor worth their time. And as for Indiana Jones, well, we'll come back to that in due course. Between 2021 and 2023, Xbox Game Studios released only two games that were multi-platform at launch, Psychonauts 2 and Minecraft Legends. Bethesda was still releasing games for PlayStation and even Nintendo Switch, with the remastered version of Quake 2 in 2023 and the Elder Scrolls Online still being available on both PlayStation and Xbox. However, later that same year, well, you can guess where this is going.
This morning we announced that we will acquire Activision Blizzard in an all-cash transaction valued at $68.7 billion. This will be the largest acquisition in our history, and we are investing to create a thriving gaming ecosystem, one where world-class content can more easily reach every gamer across every platform.
That's right. In late 2023, Microsoft completed its purchase of Activision Blizzard for $75 billion. Now they owned more of some of the most profitable and well-known franchises out there. Call of Duty, Overwatch, Warcraft, Crash Bandicoot, StarCraft, Diablo. One small problem, all of them were multi-platform releases. Microsoft had to make concessions during that acquisition process, such as committing to keep releasing Call of Duty games on PlayStation for at least 10 years. And whilst the series would no longer do exclusivity deals, one had to wonder, what the hell was Microsoft going to do now that they owned all of these franchises? There was no way they could take any of them exclusive. In early 2024, following 1,900 job cuts across Microsoft Gaming, we got our first glimpse at the future of Xbox. In February of that year, Phil Spencer confirmed that 4 first-party Xbox releases would be coming to PlayStation and Nintendo consoles. Those games were, in order, Grounded and Pentiment from Obsidian, Hi-Fi Rush from Bethesda and Tango Gameworks, and Sea of Thieves from Rare. Now, this announcement took many Xbox fans by surprise. Why were they doing this? These games hadn't been announced as timed exclusives. Well, to quote Phil,
I don't think we should, as an industry, ever rule out a game going to any other platform. We want to see what happens, because going and doing the development work to bring them to new platforms is real work. We want to make sure that the return makes sense. We want to make sure the audience that's there has an appetite. Maybe they don't.
Now, admittedly, when I heard this news, my first thought was, okay. I was a little uncertain as to why Microsoft and Xbox was doing this in the first place, but when I found out what titles were being released on rival consoles, I wasn't too concerned. 2 of them were smaller titles, and 1 had received constant support for the previous 6 years it had been available. I will admit I was a little surprised to see the 4th, Hi-Fi Rush, go over to PlayStation 5, especially considering that it was a breakout hit for Xbox, what with it being announced and released on the same day. But I told myself, this is just an experiment. Besides, it's not like they're putting Halo or Forza on PlayStation. That would be really wild. And as to why Microsoft is starting to experiment with a multi-platform approach for its first-party games,
We make every decision with the long-term health of Xbox in mind, which means a growing platform, our games performing, building the best platform for creators, and reaching as many players as we can.
Later that year, however, some news broke that really shook Xbox fans. because Indiana Jones and the Great Circle was coming to PS5, even though Microsoft had negotiated with Disney to make it an Xbox exclusive a few years prior. So much for Microsoft's strategy of exclusives. Phil, care to explain?
We run a business. It's definitely true inside of Microsoft. The bar is high for us in terms of delivery. We have to give back to the company. So I look at this. How can we make our games as strong as possible? Our platform continues to grow on console, on PC, and on cloud. It's just going to be a strategy that works for us.
Let me translate that for you. We here at Microsoft aren't making any money from selling Xbox consoles, and we are lagging so far behind PlayStation that not even buying companies for billions of dollars is going to change our fortunes. So I guess releasing our games on multiple platforms is the way forward, because we were too stupid to stop and think, is this a good idea that will deliver in the long term? I've come to realise that Microsoft's acquisition spree of game companies has only been beneficial in the short term, not the long term. They can certainly boast about how many franchises they now own directly, but the number that are exclusive to Xbox is heavily outweighed by those that are multi-platform. And out of the 40-odd studios the Microsoft gaming division now directly oversees, only 4 have released games that have all been Xbox exclusives. Gears of War developer The Coalition, Halo Studios, formerly 343 Industries, Forza Motorsport developer Turn10 Studios, and The Initiative, who is working on a Perfect Dark reboot. And who's to say Gears of War or Halo or Forza Motorsport won't remain exclusive to Xbox? When you look at the long list of games that are planned for release on PlayStation later this year, you realise very quickly exclusives are becoming less of a priority for Microsoft and Xbox. Now, obviously with something like this, there are going to be supporters and critics. Some will tell you that this is a good thing because it means more gamers will have the opportunity to play more titles on the console of their choice. Others will claim that this is terrible, a travesty, because if Xbox exclusives are available on rival consoles, what is the point of even having an Xbox in the first place? And if Microsoft Gaming becomes a third-party publisher like Sega, wouldn't that leave PlayStation with no competition, thus allowing them to exert full dominance in the video gaming market? So where do I stand on this? Well, my feelings are quite complicated to say the least. The issue I have with Microsoft's approach stems not from the fact that they are putting exclusives on PlayStation, it's more to do with the choices that they have gone with for multi-platform releases and how that affects the Xbox brand. Forza Horizon, for example, has been an Xbox exclusive since 2012. Hell, Forza as a franchise has been Xbox exclusive since it began 20 years ago. So does this mean future Forza games will be available on PlayStation? Because I don't see Sony releasing its alternative, Gran Turismo, on Xbox anytime soon. I also can't ignore the fact that Xbox has backtracked on its plans that it had in 2019. 5 years ago, they were going all in on exclusivity for Xbox. Now, those plans have all but gone. In 2025, only Avowed and South of Midnight are staying Xbox exclusive as of recording in March 2025. Everything else that Microsoft Gaming is bringing out will be multi-platform. To give you a better idea of how problematic this has become for Xbox, let's take a look at Sony. PlayStation Studios, as of March 2025, has 21 fully owned game studios. When including Bungie, which isn't officially part of PlayStation Studios, the total number of Sony-owned development game studios rises to 22. Whilst a handful of these studios have worked on or developed multi-platform releases in the past, how many of these studios do you think are currently developing games for release on Xbox? The answer is 2. 2 studios. One of them is Bungie, which is still working on Destiny 2 because that game was released in 2017, 5 years before they were bought by Sony. They're also working on a game called Marathon, which will be released on Xbox Series X, from what I understand. And the second is San Diego Studio, who makes the yearly MLB The Show. That was a PlayStation exclusive for several years until 2021 when it came to Xbox, followed by Nintendo Switch in 2022. In both cases, PlayStation themselves do not directly publish those games, unlike Xbox Game Studios. And before some people type into the comments section, but some games that were published by Sony as PlayStation exclusives came to Xbox, yes, they did. Death Stranding 1, for example, came to Xbox last year, but Sony didn't publish it. That was 505 Games. And the only reason it came to Xbox in the first place was because Sony gave the rights to Death Stranding back to creator Hideo Kojima, who, interestingly, is working on a game called OD for Xbox Game Studios. I wonder if that will stay an exclusive. But PlayStation is not going to release any of its first-party games such as Horizon, Spider-Man, God of War, Astrobot, or even Gran Turismo onto Xbox anytime soon. That's the harsh reality of it. Their focus right now is on PC. I suppose it's easy to make the assumption that PlayStation is fighting a console war that nobody is interested in participating in anymore. But the thing is, this war ended 10 years ago. It ended when Microsoft screwed up the launch of the Xbox One. Yes, a news phase could have begun had Microsoft stuck with the 15 game studios it had in 2019 and continued to deliver exclusives. Instead, Microsoft chose to go on an acquisition spree and gobbled up too many studios, of which precisely none of them were making Xbox exclusive games, and now they're paying the price by having to release games on PlayStation 5. If Microsoft really wanted more studios, they should have bought companies they'd worked closely with for years prior. I can give you several examples. If there are any other studios that I've missed, feel free to let me know in the comments. I was going to include Ori developer Moon Studios in that list, but considering what went on there, it's understandable why Microsoft split with them. Not to get too meta here, but Phil Spencer's quote here regarding the closure of Lionhead Studios in 2016 really rings a bell.
You acquire a studio for what they're great at now, and your job is to help them accelerate how they do what they do, not them accelerate what you do.
Well, that's what you're doing right now at Microsoft. You've bought up these companies to accelerate your growth in the gaming market without considering whether they're an appropriate choice. And even if they do release a good exclusive like Tango Gameworks' Hi-Fi Rush, what's to stop you bringing it to PS5 or closing the studio entirely? Because it's better for your shareholders? Because gamers might not agree with you. Multi-platform releases haven't killed Xbox as a brand. It's been on the verge of collapse since 2013. And whilst it managed to stay away from the cliff edge for long enough to get back on track as the 8th generation went on, it is now flying off the cliff edge entirely and diving into waters unknown. I have no idea how this multi-platform strategy will fare in the long term, and I don't particularly care what happens. I just want good games. And as much as I would like to sit here and end this video with the statement that Xbox's multi-platform strategy, whilst divisive, is the best option for gamers, Microsoft itself has no idea how this will fare. I suppose we have to wait 12 more months and watch events unfold. But Microsoft is in this position because of some corporate decisions that, looking back now, may not have been the correct call. And for me, it all started back in 2018 when they started gobbling up studios for their IP only without any consideration as to whether said studio was the right match for a division dedicated to releasing exclusive games. If this is the bed you want to make and die in Xbox, go ahead. But if this move doesn't pay off and Xbox remains in third place until the division is shut down altogether, then, frankly...
And you are out of here!